You keep waiting for the right conditions. More money, more free time, less stress, a calmer year, a kinder boss. You keep telling yourself, music, once that changes, I'll change. I need to tell you something, and I'm not going to soften it. Music. That season is not coming. I know that's not what you clicked on this video hoping to hear. You were probably hoping for 5 hacks, a shortcut, something that finally makes this easier. I'm going to give you real usable steps by the end of this, but not until you've let this first harder truth land. Not because life is unfair, not because you got a bad draw, but because you've been waiting for the weather to fix your character. Music, and the weather was never the problem. It's not the economy. It's not your boss. Music. It's not the government, your parents, or the year you were born. It's your philosophy. Music. The quiet set of beliefs running underneath every choice you make. What you think is possible. What you think you deserve. What you think effort is actually for. That is the thing steering your life, not your conditions, your philosophy. And for a lot of people watching this right now, that philosophy has a crack in its foundation. Every year, a little more life gets poured into a house that was never built to hold it. Music. So here's the deal. For the next 50 minutes, I'm not handing you 10 hacks. I'm not giving you a 5-day routine you'll abandon on day 6. I'm giving you something slower and heavier and far more useful. Music, a philosophy strong enough to carry an actual life. Let me tell you about 2 men. Same town, same size of field. Music, same sky over both of them. One man walked his field every evening. Music. He pulled the weeds before they spread. He mended the fence before it broke. He planted before he felt ready. Music. Because he understood readiness was never going to arrive on its own. He didn't wait for a good mood to show up before he picked up the tools.
He didn't wait for certainty. He just went out most evenings and did the unglamorous work that never once made it into a story worth telling at dinner. The other man walked past that same kind of field and said the same thing every season. Music. I'll get to it when things calm down. Same rain fell on both of them. Same number of hard days, same number of hours in the day. 5 years later, one field was feeding a family. Music. The other was still waiting for a better season. That's not a story about farming. Music. That's a story about you, and it hasn't finished being written yet. Music. Here's where most people get stuck, and it isn't where they think. They believe they have a circumstances problem. Not enough money, not enough time, not enough luck. So they spend years trying to fix the outside. A new job, a new city, a new relationship, while the inside stays exactly the same. And nothing changes because nothing on the inside changed. Let me ask you something. If I gave you everything you're asking for right now, music, the raise, the free time, the fresh start, would you actually be a different person in 6 months? Or would you just be the same person with the same habits, standing in nicer circumstances, slowly recreating the same results? Be honest with yourself. That's not a rhetorical question. That's the whole diagnosis. Most people are running a philosophy of wishing. Wish it were easier. Wish the boss were better. Wish the timing were right. Wish, wish, wish. As if the universe owes them a rewrite. A few people are running a different philosophy entirely. Not wishing it were easier, becoming better, not asking the load to get lighter, building the kind of back that can carry it. That's the entire gap. That's the whole difference between the 2 men in that field. It was never about who got the better season. It's not the economy. Music. It's not your boss. It's not the government. It's your philosophy. Say that back to yourself the next time you want to blame the weather. It's not my circumstances. It's my philosophy. Now, I want to be fair to you because this isn't about blame. Music. Circumstances are real. Some people start on third base and some people start with a hole already dug beneath them. I'm not here to pretend the field is level for everyone, music, because it isn't. But here's what I've watched over and over, music, in people who make it and people who don't. The field was never the deciding factor. The philosophy was 2 people can start in the exact same hole. One keeps digging, blaming the shovel, blaming the dirt, blaming the man who handed it to them. Music. The other picks up the shovel and starts building steps out. Same hole, different philosophy, music different next 10 years. And notice, This was never a talent story either. Nobody in that comparison had a rare gift the other one lacked. The gap wasn't skill. It was whether they showed up on the days showing up felt pointless. That's worth remembering because so many people quietly believe their stall is a talent problem when almost every time it's a discipline problem wearing a talent costume. Music. So, let me ask you the harder question. What have you been blaming quietly, music, for the last few years? Maybe it's the industry you chose and how nobody's hiring right now. Maybe it's your health and how you'll start once you feel better. Not realizing that feeling better is usually the result of starting, not the requirement for it. Maybe it's simply timing. You'll begin when the kids are older, when the mortgage is paid off, when this one project at work finally settles down. Music. There's always a next milestone, conveniently positioned, just far enough away to excuse today. Whatever it is, I want you to notice something. You can be right about it and still lose. You can have the most valid complaint in the world, and it still won't lift one box, won't send one email, won't walk you 1 mile closer to the life you say you want. Being right about your excuse has never once been the same thing as being free of it. This is the philosophy gap. Music. Wishing keeps you exactly where you are. Becoming is the only thing that has ever moved anyone anywhere. Think about the last time you caught yourself saying, when things get better, I'll start. Start the business. Start the workouts. Start showing up on time, speaking up in the meeting, having the conversation you've been avoiding for a year. When things get better is a philosophy. It just happens to be one that guarantees nothing ever gets better because you've made your action dependent on a condition you don't control. Here's the contrast worth carving into your memory. If you wait for motivation, you'll move only on the days it shows up. Music. And motivation is famously unreliable. If you build discipline instead, you move on the days you feel like it and the days you don't. And those second days are the ones that actually build a life. If you wish the ladder were shorter, you'll stand at the bottom, staring up, resenting the height. If you decide to climb one rung today, you'll be standing somewhere new by tonight. Not far, but somewhere new. Which is more than wishing has ever given you. This is the fork every single person stands at, usually without noticing it. Wishing or becoming, comfort or character, the complaint or the climb. And I want to be clear about something because this isn't hustle culture noise telling you to grind until you collapse and call it purpose. That's not what this is. Becoming a stronger version of yourself was never about doing more of everything. It's about doing the right small things on purpose, on repeat, long enough for them to compound. Music. We'll get to exactly what those things are, but first, you needed the philosophy underneath them or the actions won't stick. A method without a philosophy is just a diet you'll quit in March. So carry this into the next part because it's the foundation for everything else. It's not your circumstances, it's your philosophy. Let's go back to that field because there's a law running underneath it that has nothing to do with farming and everything to do with your life. You will reap what you sow in the season you sow it, not the season you demand it. Nature never negotiates on this. Nobody plants a seed on Monday and harvests on Friday because they had a deadline. The seed doesn't care about your deadline. It follows its own timeline every single time, no matter how badly you want it to hurry. And yet, how many of you have planted effort for 3 weeks, music, and then decided the whole thing doesn't work because harvest didn't show up on schedule? That's not the field failing you. That's you standing in the sowing season demanding a summer that hasn't arrived yet. Let me ask you something. What have you actually been planting for the last 12 months? Not what you've been hoping for, not what you've been dreaming about at 2 in the morning. What have you been planting with your actual hours, your actual attention, your actual habits? Because whatever that is, that's your harvest. Not maybe, not sometimes every single time. Plant excuses for a year, harvest an identical year on repeat. Plant discipline for a year, harvest a different person by the end of it. The field doesn't grade on good intentions, it grows exactly what got planted. Nothing more generous, nothing more forgiving than that. Here's the part people skip past at music because it's uncomfortable. Your mind is a garden and it works the same way that field does. Whatever you feed it daily, the content you consume, the people you surround yourself with, the conversations you keep having with yourself in the shower, that is what takes root. And roots always eventually show up above the ground, whether you meant for them to or not. You cannot feed a garden weeds all year and be shocked when harvest is nothing but weeds. So look honestly at what you've been feeding your field. The scrolling before bed, the complaining disguised as venting, music. The hours spent watching other people build the life you say you want instead of building yours. None of that is neutral. It's all seed. It's all going into the ground whether you're paying attention or not. And notice something else that gets planted without anyone realizing it. The 5 or 6 people you spend the most time with. Not as an insult to any of them. Most people aren't trying to hold you back, but standards are contagious in both directions. Music. Spend a year around people who treat excuses as normal conversation, and excuses start sounding normal to you too. Spend a year around people who treat effort as simply what you do, music, and effort starts feeling less like a special event and more like Tuesday. You don't have to abandon anyone to notice this. Music, you just have to notice it, and then be honest about which conversations are quietly planting doubt in your field, music, and which ones are planting resolve. Now here's the encouraging half of this law, because it cuts both ways. If the field grows exactly what you plant, good news. Music, you get to choose the seed. You don't get to choose the season. You don't get to choose the weather some years, music, but you get to choose the seed every single day. And that has always been enough for the people who actually change their lives. If you sow one honest hour of focused work today, you don't get to see the harvest today, but it's in the ground. It's growing where you can't see it yet. The same way a seed spends its first weeks doing all its work underground in the dark with nothing to show for it above the soil. That's not the seed failing. That's the seed doing exactly what seeds do before anything is visible. Most people quit in that invisible stage. They call it not working music because they can't see the roots yet, and so they rip up in month 2 what would have broken through the surface in month 5. This is why patience isn't a soft virtue for people with nothing better to do. Patience is a working strategy practiced by everyone who ever built something that lasted. So the question isn't whether the law of the harvest is fair. It's the fairest law there is. It gives everyone the exact same deal. Whatever you plant, you get music. The question is only this: what are you planting today right now in the field only you are responsible for? Here's the contrast, plain and simple. If you sow discipline in the sowing season, you get to stand in a harvest later that other people are still waiting on. If you sow excuses in the sowing season, you get to stand in the exact same field next year, telling yourself the same story about how it just wasn't the right time. Same field, same 12 months, 2 completely different harvests, and the only variable was the seed. I want you to sit with that for a second, not as a nice line, but as a fact about your next year. 12 months are going to pass, regardless of what you decide right now. That part isn't optional. The only thing that's optional is what gets planted in them. So before we go further, music, here's the question worth carrying. Are you willing to do the quiet, unglamorous work of sowing? Music, the kind that gets no applause, no proof for months, because you trust the law enough to plant anyway, because that trust, that willingness to work without seeing the payoff yet, is exactly what the next part of this is built on. Here's something nobody tells you early enough in life. You don't get to choose between pain and no pain. You only get to choose which pain you carry. There is the pain of discipline. So that's music. Waking up early when the bed is warm, saying no to the thing that feels good right now, doing the hard rep, having the honest conversation. That pain is real, it's not nothing. But notice its size. It shows up. It's uncomfortable for a few minutes, and then it's gone. Spent, finished, music done with you the moment you finish the thing. Then there's the other pain. The one that shows up later, uninvited at 3:00 in the morning, music 5 years down the road. The ache of realizing you had the time and didn't use it. The birthday where you're the same person you were last year, just music older. Watching
Someone else quietly living the life you keep telling people you'll get around to. That pain doesn't show up for a few minutes and leave. It moves in. It can sit on your chest for years. Music. And unlike the first pain, it doesn't get lighter with time. It gets heavier because regret has its own kind of interest, and it never stops accruing. So, understand this clearly. You are not choosing between pain and comfort. You never were. You are choosing between a small pain now and a much larger one later. Every single day that choice is on the table, whether you notice it being made or not. Discipline is the bridge. Music. Discipline is the daily choice nobody sees you make. Discipline is the price paid quietly before anyone claps for you. Say it with me one more time because it's worth repeating until it's load-bearing in your thinking. Discipline is the bridge. Discipline is the choice. Discipline is the price. Now let me be precise about something, music, because this is where people get discipline wrong and end up quitting it. Discipline isn't punishment. It isn't self-hatred wearing a productivity mask. If the voice in your head sounds cruel when it tells you to get up and do the work, that's not discipline talking.
That's something else. And it's not sustainable because nobody keeps punishing themselves for 30 years straight. Real discipline sounds different. It sounds like respect, like a promise you intend to keep. Like the version of you 5 years from now. Music quietly asking the version of you right now, are you going to take care of me or are you going to leave me exactly where you found me? That reframes everything. This isn't about grinding yourself into the ground for a goal you'll resent once you get there. Music. It's about becoming someone who keeps their word to themselves, which if you think about it, is the actual foundation under every other kind of confidence. You cannot trust yourself in a crisis if you don't even trust yourself to get up when the alarm goes off. Music. Here's the contrast worth remembering on your hardest mornings. If you choose the small pain of discipline today, tomorrow feels a little lighter. Music. And the day after that feels lighter still, because the debt isn't growing. If you choose the comfort of skipping it today, music tomorrow doesn't feel free. It feels like tomorrow owes yesterday something. And that debt has interest. Regret compounds exactly like discipline does. That's the part people don't want to hear. Music. It's not a passive, sad feeling that just sits there. It grows. Every year you don't have the conversation. It gets harder to have. Every year you don't start the thing. The gap between where you are and where you could have been gets wider, and the fear of starting gets bigger right along with it. So ask yourself honestly, not as a guilt trip, but as an actual accounting question. What pain have you been avoiding? And what has avoiding it actually cost you so far? Write the number down if you have to. Most people are stunned by it. And here's the good news, buried inside all of this. Got the music up there. The pain of discipline is always smaller than the pain of regret. Every time, no exceptions in recorded history, music, which means the trade is not even close, once you actually look at both sides of it. Honestly, you already know this, you've known it for years, the only thing left is deciding to act like you know it. But here's the question this naturally raises, and it's the right one to ask next. If discipline is just one choice at a time, does one choice actually matter? One workout, one page read, one early morning, does any single one of them really move the needle? The honest answer is no. Music, not by itself, which is exactly why the next law matters so much, because it explains what happens when you stop looking at these choices one at a time, music, and start looking at what they do stacked on top of each other, day after day, for long enough that most people give up before they see it work. Here's a strange truth about the things that actually change a life. Almost none of them look impressive on the day you do them. Music. Reading 10 pages, making the bed, sending the email you've been avoiding, walking instead of scrolling. None of it looks like a turning point. It looks small because it is small on music that day, and that's exactly why most people skip it. Here's the sentence worth remembering. The actions that build a life are almost always easy to do, which means they're also easy not to do. And that single fact, music, that it's easy either way, is the whole reason most people end up on the wrong side of it. Skipping the workout once doesn't ruin you. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like nothing. That's the trap. Nothing feels like nothing every single day, music, until one day you look up and nothing has become the entire shape of your life. Meanwhile, doing the small thing doesn't feel like a triumph either. It feels like nothing too. which is exactly why almost nobody does it consistently enough to notice the return. They quit right around the point where the return was about to become visible. Think about a ladder for a second. Nobody arrives at the top in one jump. Music. There's no elevator built for character. There's only the next rung, then the one after that, then the one after that. The same repetitive motion over and over, music, until one day you're standing somewhere you couldn't have reached any faster. No matter how badly you wanted to skip steps, the people who reached the top of anything worth reaching didn't find a shortcut. They just kept their hand on the next rung, on the days it would have been easier to let go. And here's the part that should genuinely change how you see your daily choices. Those small actions don't just add up, they compound, which means music, they don't just stack, they multiply on top of each other quietly in a way that looks like nothing for a long time and then looks like everything all at once. A little discipline today makes tomorrow's discipline slightly easier. A little more tomorrow makes the day after that easier still. It's the same mechanism running in reverse for neglect. A little avoidance today makes tomorrow's avoidance more natural, more automatic, more who you are instead of what you did once. There's an old truth about tools that applies perfectly here. Music. A blade left alone doesn't stay sharp. It rusts. Not because anyone attacked it, just because it sat still. The same blade used daily sharpens instead. Same metal, same starting point. The only difference is whether it got used or whether it got left alone. You are not so different from that blade. Skill left unused dulls. Relationships left untended rust. Music. Discipline left unpracticed goes soft. None of that requires a disaster to happen. It just requires stillness sustained long enough. So let me bring this down to something you can actually hold on to today, not 5 years from now.
If you read 10 honest pages a day, in a year that's over 3,000 pages, several serious books worth of thinking sitting inside your head that wasn't there before. If you skip it because 10 pages feels pointless, in a year you have exactly what you started with, music, nothing, and an excuse that's gotten a year more comfortable. If you have one difficult, honest conversation a month instead of avoiding it, music, in a year, you've resolved 12 things most people carry silently for a decade. If you keep avoiding it because one conversation feels small and uncomfortable, in a year you're carrying 12 more unresolved things than you needed to. Music. Money works the same way, and it's often the clearest place to see it. Set aside a small, almost embarrassing amount every week, and for months it looks like nothing. Barely worth the effort of moving into a separate account. But compounding doesn't care how unimpressive the beginning looks. Given enough time, that small, boring habit outperforms the person who waited for a big lump sum before they'd finally start taking it seriously. Music. The habit was always the multiplier. The size of the first deposit almost never was. And here's what almost nobody tells you about all three of those examples. The reading, the conversation, the saved music dollar.
None of them are really about pages or dollars or check boxes. They're about who you're becoming while you do them. A person who reads consistently doesn't just know more facts. They become someone who finishes things, who sits with difficulty instead of reaching for a distraction, who trusts their own follow-through. That person is worth more. Music, not just financially, though often that too, but in every room they walk into, regardless of which specific pages they read. This is the part people miss when they're chasing hacks instead of character. Music. You don't build a better life by finding a clever shortcut around effort.
You build it by becoming the kind of person effort doesn't scare anymore. And that person, once built, music, can walk into a completely different problem next year and solve it, because the skill was never really about the reading list. It was about who the reading built. None of these single actions look like much on the day you do them. That was never the test. The test was always whether you'd keep doing the small thing long enough for it to compound. Long after it stopped feeling new. Long after anyone was watching. Long after it would have been easier to quietly let it go. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, music, because compounding sounds great in theory, and then reality interrupts it. You will hit a season where nothing seems to be working, no matter how much you plant, no matter how sharp you keep the blade, where the ladder seems to stop and the field seems to stop giving anything back. That season is real.
And what you do inside it is what the rest of this comes down to. There's an old rhythm running underneath every living thing that grows. And it's worth naming clearly, because most people only ever notice one part of it. Music. Spring is when you plant. This the easiest season to feel motivated in, because everything is new. Music, new goal, new year, new version of you. Spring gets all the attention. Spring gets the fresh notebook and the big declaration. Summer is when you tend. This is the season nobody talks about because it's the least photogenic one. Long, hot days of watering, weeding, music, and watching very little visible change, while the heat makes every task harder than it looked back in spring. Most people who quit in summer, not because the goal was wrong, but because summer is boring, and boring doesn't make a good story. Fall is when you harvest. This is the reward. But notice something important about it. Fall only exists for the fields that got tended all summer. Fall doesn't show up as a gift.
It shows up as an invoice finally being paid for work that happened months before anyone could see it. And then winter comes, music, not as a punishment for a bad spring, but simply because winter always comes for every field, every single year, regardless of how good the harvest was. Let's stay with winter for a moment, music, because it's the season people misunderstand the worst. Every field goes through a winter. Every garden knows this too. It's music. There has never been a field in the history of farming that skipped straight from spring to spring and never once went cold. Music. Never once looked dead. Never once had a season where nothing appeared to be growing at all. That's not a flaw in the design. That is the design. And yet, when winter shows up in a person's life, the job that fell through, music, the relationship that ended, the year where every plan collapsed at once, most people interpret it as a verdict, as proof, as the universe finally confirming what they secretly feared, that this is just who they are as music and this is just how their story goes. I need you to hear this clearly. Winter is a season. It is not a sentence. The field that looks dead in January is not dead. It's doing work you can't see, resting, music, resetting, preparing ground that summer's growth actually exhausted. Nothing about that field's winter erases the harvest it produced last fall, and nothing about it prevents the harvest it will produce next year. Unless the farmer mistakes the season for the end of the story and simply walks away from the field. Doesn't start with sweeping changes or grand gestures, not the season itself. Every farmer, every single one who ever succeeded lived through winters. The danger is deciding in the middle music of it that this cold is permanent and abandoning the field precisely when it needed tending the most. Let me ask you something gently, music, because I think you already know the answer. Have you ever had a hard season, a genuinely hard one, and quietly started believing it meant something about who you are? Music. Not this is a difficult year, but this is who I am now. This is my life. As if a season had promoted itself to an identity. Music. That's the mistake winter tricks almost everyone into making at least once. The music. Go back to the two men in that field for a moment. Understand something about them that I didn't tell you earlier. They both had winters. Both of them. The man who ended up with a full harvest didn't get some charmed version of the year where the cold skipped his field and landed only on his neighbors. The difference was never the winter. The difference was what each man did inside it. One man used the cold season to mend the fence, sharpen the tools, prepare the music soil, rest enough to be ready for spring. The other man used the same cold season to decide the whole thing wasn't worth it and let the field go quiet for good. Same music, winter. Two completely different outcomes on the other side of it, because winter doesn't write the ending. What you do inside winter writes the ending. I want to say something else here, music, because I promised you this wouldn't be toxic positivity, and I meant it. Hard seasons are actually hard. I'm not going to stand here and tell you to just smile through the cold, or that everything happens for a reason, or that your winter is secretly a blessing you'll thank later. Sometimes a season is just genuinely difficult, and pretending otherwise insults what you're carrying. What I'm telling you is different. Difficult is not the same as final. Cold is not the same as dead. A setback is weather passing through your life, music, not a new permanent climate.
unless you decide to build your identity around the forecast instead of around your character. So, if you're in a winter right now, and statistically some of you watching this are, music here is the only real question worth asking.
What would tending the field look like this month for this is music, even though nothing is visibly growing yet? Maybe it's smaller than you think. Music. Rest that's actually rest, not collapse. One skill sharpened quietly while nobody's watching. One relationship mended before spring makes it urgent. One honest look at what needs to change before the next planting season arrives. Music. So you're not caught making the same mistake twice. Winter ends. It always has music for every field that stayed tended. Spring has never once failed to arrive for someone who kept caring for the ground underneath their feet. The only fields that never see spring again are the ones somebody walked away from in January. Music convinced the cold was the whole story. Don't be the one who walks away in January. So now you've got the philosophy. You understand the harvest, music, the two pains, the compounding weight of small things, and the truth about winter, music. But philosophy that stays as an idea in your head is just decor. At some point this has to turn into something you do today, not next Monday, not after the right season finally arrives. So let's make it concrete. Not next year, not when things settle down. Today, meaning the actual day you're living in right now, the one with hours still left in it. I'm not going to give you a 12-step system you'll abandon by Thursday. I'm going to give you 5 small disciplines, the kind that look unimpressive on the day you do them, music, and compound into something unrecognizable a year from now. Pick even 2. Start there. First, name the one thing you've been avoiding. Not a vague thing, the actual thing. Music, the conversation, the application, the appointment, the apology. Write it down in plain words. You cannot fix what you refuse to name honestly. And most people spend years managing the discomfort of an unnamed problem instead of just naming it and starting to solve it.
Second, music do one uncomfortable thing before the day ends, related to that thing you just named. Not the whole project. One honest step. Send the first message, make the first call, open the document you've been avoiding, and write 1 paragraph. The size of the step matters far less than whether it happened. Third, protect 1 hour today from noise. Phone away, notifications off, and spend it on something that builds you instead of something that merely distracts you. Reading, practicing a skill, planning, music, thinking clearly without an audience. 1 hour. That's it. Not because 1 hour changes everything by itself, but because it's the seed, and seeds do their work underground before they do it above. Music. Fourth, have 1 honest conversation with yourself tonight, on paper if you can. 10 minutes. What did you plant today? What did you avoid? Music. What would the version of you, 5 years from now, want you to do differently tomorrow? This isn't about self-punishment. Music. Remember, that's not what real discipline sounds like. It's an honest accounting. The same way a farmer walks the field at the end of the day, just to see what actually happened, not what he hoped happened. Music. Fifth, before you sleep, decide the first thing you'll do tomorrow. Specifically, before you're tired enough to talk yourself out of it. Most days are lost in the first 20 minutes after waking up. In the gap between opening your eyes and deciding what those eyes are for, close that gap tonight. Music. And tomorrow already has a head start. That's it. 5 disciplines. Music. None of them require new conditions, new money, a new year, or a better mood. Every single one of them is available to you in the next few hours, regardless of what kind of day you've had. Notice I gave you 5, not 15. That's not an accident. Music. The reason most self-improvement attempts collapse by the second week isn't that the person lacked willpower.
It's that they try to overhaul everything at once. And overhauling everything at once is a system designed to fail because it depends on a level of motivation nobody sustains for long. 5 small doable things beat 20 ambitious ones every music time because 5 things can actually survive contact with a bad day. 20 can't. Here's the contrast to carry with you as you do this. If you wait until the conditions are perfect to start, you'll still be waiting next year. Because conditions are never actually perfect. Music, they're just a story you tell yourself about why today doesn't count. If you start today imperfectly, with a day that has plenty wrong with it, you'll be 12 months of compounding ahead of the version of you that kept waiting. I want to be honest about something else here because it matters. This isn't about doing more of everything all at once starting tomorrow, until you burn out in 6 weeks and call the whole philosophy a failure. That's hustle without wisdom, music. And it doesn't build character. It just borrows energy from next month and calls it progress. This is about choosing a few true things. Music, doing them on purpose and letting them compound quietly while you keep living an actual life alongside them. Character isn't built in a single dramatic afternoon. Music. It's built in 5 ordinary, unimpressive minutes, repeated on the days you didn't feel like it, until repeating it is just who you've become. So don't ask yourself what you'll do differently this year. That question is too big, and it's exactly the kind of question that talks you into waiting for January. Ask yourself the smaller, sharper question: what will you do in the next hour? Answer that honestly, and act on the answer before you finish watching this. Now, I want you to see where this actually leads.
Not in some distant hazy someday, but in a picture specific enough that you can feel the difference between the path you've been on and the one available to you starting today. Picture the version of you 1 year from today who took those 5 small disciplines seriously. Not perfectly, just seriously on most days. The way an adult keeps a promise, even when it's inconvenient. That person isn't necessarily rich, isn't necessarily famous, isn't necessarily living a life that looks dramatically different from the outside. Music, at least not yet. Remember, real compounding is quiet for longer than people expect. But something has changed underneath the surface, and it shows up in the details. They keep their word to themselves now, which means they trust themselves in a way they didn't a year ago. They've had the hard conversations instead of stockpiling them. They've read, practiced, built, shown up, not every single day, but enough days on repeat, for long enough that it stopped being an event and became a character trait. They sleep differently, not because life got easier, but because they're no longer lying awake, accumulating a debt of avoided music things. The regret pile that used to sit quietly in the corner of every quiet moment has gotten smaller because they've been paying it down in small, unglamorous installments for months. They walk into rooms differently too, not louder, not more arrogant, just music, steadier. There's a particular kind of calm that only comes from evidence, not motivational evidence. Music, actual evidence built from a year of small proof that they follow through. Even when nobody's checking, ask them how they did it, and they won't give you a dramatic story. There was no single turning point morning, no lightning bolt, just an ordinary Tuesday, then another one, then enough of them stacked together that looking back feels like looking at a different person entirely.
Even though day to day it never once felt that dramatic while it was happening, they notice small things now. A music the neighbour who finally started the business they'd talked about for a decade. The friend who's oddly calm, under pressure, that used to break them. Music. And they understand exactly why. Because they've lived the mechanism themselves. Not a lucky break, not a personality transplant. Just a year of small, unglamorous choices. Nobody was there to applaud. Now picture the other version, the one who watched this same video, felt something for about 11 minutes, and then went back to waiting for a better season. Same 12 months will have passed for them too. That part was never optional, remember? Same number of days, same number of chances to plant something. But their field looks about the same as it does today, maybe a little more overgrown. The conversation's still unhad, the book's still unread, the hours still spent scrolling instead of building. Not because they're a bad person. Music. Most people in that position aren't just because they kept waiting for conditions that were never going to arrive on their own. And the waiting itself became the whole year. I want to be clear about what I'm actually describing here, because I don't want you picturing hustle culture success. Music. The version where you're supposedly thriving but quietly running on empty, measuring your worth by output, treating rest like a failure. That's not the vision. That was never the vision. The vision is a person who has built enough internal structure that success doesn't require constant performance to feel real. Someone whose confidence comes from character, not from an audience. Someone who can have an average Tuesday and still feel like they're becoming someone, because the becoming isn't dependent on applause. That's available to you, not in 5 years. It starts compounding from the first honest day you choose it today. Music, if you're willing.
And I'll say one more thing about this vision because it matters. Music. None of this requires you to become a different person, unrecognizable to the people who love you. You don't need a personality transplant. Music. You need the same person you already are. Showing up slightly more often for the things that matter on the days it would have been easier not to. That's the whole shift. Music. Small, repeatable, and entirely available to someone exactly like you. The only real question left is which of those two people you're planning to be a year from now, and whether you're going to decide that with your actions today or leave it to be decided by default. The way most winters get decided by whoever simply stopped tending the field first. So, let's bring it all the way back to where we started. Music. 2 men, same field, same snorts, weather, different philosophy. It was never the economy. It was never the boss, the government, or the year you happen to be born. It's your philosophy, the quiet operating system underneath every choice you've been making long before you started paying attention to it. You will reap exactly what you sow in the season you sow it, not the season you demand it. So look honestly at what you've been planting. And if you don't like the harvest you're expecting, change the seed today. Music, not the excuse. Discipline is the bridge. Discipline is the choice. Discipline is the price paid quietly now, so regret doesn't charge you interest later. The actions that change a life are almost always small enough to skip without noticing. Music. Which is exactly why most people skip them, and exactly why the ones who don't end up somewhere entirely different, one unimpressive rung at a time. And if you're in a winter right now, hear this clearly. It is a season, not a sentence. Music. Tend the field anyway. Spring has never once failed to return for someone who kept caring for the ground underneath their feet.
None of this requires 5 years, a better economy, or a different set of parents. It requires today, music, 1 honest hour, 1 hard conversation, 1 small discipline chosen on a day that didn't feel special, because it never will feel special until you've already made it count. So I'll leave you with this, and I want you to actually sit with it instead of letting it pass. Music by. You are not waiting for your life to start. You are already standing in the field holding the seed. And what you plant in the next 24 hours is the only harvest anyone will ever be able to hold you responsible